right, so I'll be letting folks in from the waiting room as they join the meeting. So sorry if I'm a little distracted while welcoming you all. So hopefully you're here in the right place for our OWHE webinar series. We are talking about getting unstuck, overcoming and uncovering barriers to change with Heather Roberts. This was a really popular session at our recent conference this year. And now that we live in an entirely new world, Heather's got some great updates to share as well. But before we dive into that too much more, I do want to give kind of a heads up for our next webinar. So that one is based on one of our previous conference sessions called How Do Non-Binary People Fit Within a Women's Organization? And I'm really looking forward to that one. We don't have the date set, so stay tuned, but that'll be next month. We'll also be soliciting session proposals for the upcoming conference soon. So if that's something you're thinking about, I'd love to brainstorm ideas with you or logistics of what webinars are like or anything like that. So let me know if you have any interest in moving forward with OWHE, getting more involved with webinars, sessions, or anything that we do. I'd love to help and support. Throughout this webinar, if you have any tech trouble or are needing anything, please send a private chat to me, the OWHE handle. So I'm Shannon Shivers, by the way. I'm the Director of Education for OWHE. And yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and start moving us forward with today's webinar. So first off, you'll note at the top here, it says go to menti.com and enter code 5692338. So you won't need to use this right away, but if you want to go ahead and just pull this up and have it ready on your phone or your desktop or whatever works well for you, that'll come in handy during the presentation. And then Heather has this bio for me to read to y'all. So Heather May Roberts coaches current and aspiring leaders to master the fundamentals of living and leading in these challenging times. She uses her integrative coaching skills to help her clients define their visions and values and build a solid foundation of mental, physical, and emotional health. Heather's definition of leader extends beyond managers and traditionally recognized leadership positions to include all people who align their values with their actions and focus on outcomes which are larger than themselves. She's committed to helping these leaders uncover and overcome the internal barriers that get in the way of developing their unique talents so they're able to realize their full potential and lead mission-driven lives. While working as a research assistant at Oregon State University, Heather started on her own self-development path when she took her first leadership course and experienced the transformational power of working with a coach to identify her core values, strengths, and ambitions. She participated in several leadership and coaching programs, served as leadership mentors in OSU's Leadership Collaborative, and applied what she learned to coordinate the development and implementation of OSU College of Forestry's strategic plan to enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, Heather uses her strengths to help others identify and hone their unique strengths to unlock their creative potential and live healthy, fulfilling lives. Her mission is to equip leaders with the knowledge, frameworks, and tools needed to improve their long-term health, the success of their organizations, and our collective ability to preserve the life-sustaining systems of the planet. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Heather.
All right, thank you, Shannon. So Shannon, is my screen showing now? Great, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. I'm really glad that you're here, and I'm going to go ahead and just dive right in. Assuming that I'm not going to have technical difficulties. Okay, there's always a second way. So it was in the winter of 2014, and I was in the first session of OSU's Journey into Leadership course when the facilitator made a comment that changed my life. He said, "Questions are more important than answers, and Great leaders ask great questions. It didn't seem that significant at the time, yet I realized that I had never really thought about where questions came from. But then I started asking a lot of questions, and many of these were very big questions, like why are things the way they are? And how can we change them for the better? What prevents us from making desired changes individually and collectively? With our knowledge about climate change, why are we still trading the long-term health of ourselves and our planet for the short-term profit of a few individuals and groups? And in an age of accelerating change and information overload, how do I identify and focus on what matters most for the health of myself, others, and the life-sustaining systems of the planet? So, just a few little questions. These questions led me to investigate change at multiple scales for my own growth and development, and within my work community as the coordinator for diversity, equity, and inclusion at OSU's College of Forestry. By trying to broadly understand why things are the way they are, I came to believe that our world is fundamentally out of balance. For so long in our industrial growth society, we've overvalued production and growth while devaluing rest and sustainability. So we're basically striving for infinite growth on a finite planet. And in coaching, there's this concept of polarities. And a polarity is a pair of interdependent positive opposites that are both strengths or values needed over time for a healthy, thriving individual or organizational system. So neither side is really good or bad. You just need a balance of those. If you're too focused on one side or the other, then you're going to have an imbalance. And it helps me to think about this in the context of breathing. We're constantly cycling through inhaling and exhaling. One isn't better, and we need the both. And different people have different tendencies, but as a culture, we've been favoring certain areas and neglecting the others for so long that I think it's the root of a lot of the problems we see in the world. It's like we're constantly trying to exhale while taking in as little air as possible. So to rebalance ourselves, we need to allow for more space, more air to come in. Natural systems are self-regulating once the core balance is restored. As I set out to rebalance my life, one of the things that really bothered me was that I had changes that I wanted to make that I knew would improve my overall health, but I was having trouble taking consistent action to make some of those changes. So sometimes we don't know what to do, and we need to spend time on the what, why, and how. Usually we actually start with the what. And so I'm going to take exercise as an example because it's one that a lot of people struggle with. And so let's say that I want to start exercising. A lot of times people will go straight from the what to the how, meaning they'll start to make a plan about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it. However, if you skip straight from the what to the how without clarifying why it's important to you, this can be a reason that we fail to follow through on our plans. So the next step after deciding on what you really want to do is to look at why is it important? What is the reason this is important to me? And what areas of my life does this affect? And how will my life improve if I make this change? So in our exercise example, there are a lot of reasons somebody might want to exercise, but if all they have is a vague sense that exercise is good for them and something that they should do, because everybody says that it's important, but they don't really know why or what they're going to get out of it, it can be really hard to follow through. So sometimes we don't know what to do, and we need to spend time figuring out our priorities and breaking down big goals into manageable action steps. But what frustrated me was when I felt like I knew what to do, I knew why it was important to me, and I even had a plan for how to do it, yet I still wasn't able to follow through with my plan. This frustrated me because I felt like if I was going to be a change agent in the world, I needed to be able to make the changes I wanted to make in my own life. I found in some areas of my life, I was able to make desired changes, yet in other areas, no matter how much I tried and planned it out, I just couldn't seem to get any traction. So I asked myself this question: when I'm not doing what I know I want to do to improve my life or the life of others, how do I get myself to do it? What do I do when I know what to do, but I'm not doing it? So my agenda for today is really to give you this big picture overview of what's really going on when we feel stuck like that and what we can do to get unstuck. My goal is to paint an outline of the big picture, because living in the world that we're in today, it's really hard to get a sense of how everything fits. We're so distracted in this fast-paced world. And as E.O. Wilson puts it, it's like we're drowning in information while starving for wisdom. So here's a roadmap for our session today. First, we're going to spend some time locating the true source of the problem. Then we're going to look at the nature or the shape of the solution. And finally, we'll look at some strategies for addressing barriers that are likely to come up along the way. And then at the end, there will be some time for audience questions and reflections, hopefully. So my invitation to you all at this point is to relax, because we learn better when we're in a more relaxed state. I'm going to be presenting a lot of information, and that's intentional because I feel like understanding the nature of something can be even more critical than having specific steps outlined for you to follow. So I trust that you'll find something valuable in here if you relax and just absorb the information. Don't try to take it all in, just be open and see what resonates. You can always watch the recording later, but while you're here, whether that's live or watching the recording, consider this invitation to relax and be fully present, because part of what makes learning stick is being fully present during the learning process. I want to define just a few terms here, because I'm using the term subconscious to refer to the part of our thinking that occurs outside of our conscious awareness. Some people use the term unconscious interchangeably with the subconscious, but the subconscious includes functions for regulating our autonomic nervous system, but it's basically anything that is taking place outside of your conscious awareness. And a belief is something that someone believes to be true, which may or may not actually be true. And a limiting belief is a belief that is not objectively true or false, but it constrains you because you believe in it. Limiting beliefs give way to self-fulfilling prophecies. So for example, if you believe you are capable of being physically strong, you'll take actions like lifting weights to make that true. But if you believe you're incapable, you won't take those necessary actions. So this type of belief is not inherently true or false, but it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy precisely because you believe it to be true. So we're at step 1, locating the source of the problem. Back to my main question. When the call for presentations for OWHE came out, I had just listened to an interview of Dr. Sasha Heinz on the Science of Success podcast. She asked the question, do you know what to do, but you don't do it? And I was like, yes, this is my question. So I listened intently to this podcast. And what Dr. Heinz said was, no one's ever actually stuck. But the reason you feel stuck is that what you want, meaning your desire or change, whatever, is bumping up against an emotional roadblock or a subconscious belief. And the key part is down there, often from your childhood. The basic premise is that if you consciously know what you want, but you can't seem to get started, or you start and stop a lot and can't seem to keep going, then the problem is not that you need a better strategy or a different technique. And it's also not that there's something wrong with you that means that you're not capable of getting what you want. But often we think that's where the problem lies, in our external strategies or our inherent limitations, like this is just the way that I am. And when we're not getting traction and continue to repeat these old patterns of thinking and behaving that we don't want to do, we know they're not serving us, but we're still doing them. The solution is to look for what's going on in the subconscious that's holding us back. And so to locate the source of the real source of the problem, you want to get away from the thinking that the problem is you or something external. So what we can see are behaviors are just the tip of the iceberg. So underneath the surface is what drives our conscious thoughts and behaviors, and it's where the change needs to happen. So obviously we have thoughts that are conscious as well, but we have other thoughts that are occurring outside of consciousness, which are generating the feelings, and our feelings, our emotions, are actually what drive our behavior. As Dr. Heinz put it, you have one foot on the gas, that's your neocortex, and you have one foot on the brake, that's your emotional cortex, saying that's way too scary. So the emotional cortex is the part of the brain that drives decisions, so it will always win. And what I've noticed in many approaches to change and strategic planning is they focus on the conscious level strategies and techniques without addressing the underlying fears and beliefs that can undermine success. So it's like applying more pressure on the gas without realizing that your other foot is on the brake. As a result, change tends to be incremental and temporary, if it happens at all, and it uses up a lot of your energy. Since it's your subconscious on the brake, whenever there's a conflict, your subconscious always wins. So the first step is to recognize that the problem is not what you think it is. There's not some fundamental flaw in you. You don't need some other strategy or app to track your progress. And recognize that you may not even be aware of what's going on beneath the surface of your consciousness. There's a whole lot of other stuff underneath that's driving all of what you're aware of. At the most basic level, we all have the same core needs for survival, connection, and expression. So we need to stay alive. That is our number one need. But then we don't want to be abandoned or rejected. And anytime we introduce a change, it's seen as potentially threatening our ability to get our core needs met, because we're moving away from the familiar, which is seen by the subconscious as safe, even when it's not, towards the unknown. When we subconsciously fear that making a desired change will threaten our ability to meet one or more of our core needs, that's when our subconscious motivations conflict with our conscious intentions. And the subconscious always wins. When the brain thinks something is possible, it will sketch out the route for achieving it. And when your brain thinks something is impossible, it will find excuses for why not to do it. It doesn't matter how detailed your plan is if your brain believes that you can't achieve your goal. As Claire Zammit, the creator of Feminine Power Program, puts it, you can't attract love on top of a deep inner sense of being unlovable. You can't generate success on top of a deep feeling of being unworthy. You can't make an impact on the world if you secretly fear you have nothing worthwhile to contribute. Related is we all hear certain messages from society about what we should and shouldn't do. But these messages received differ based on different aspects of our identities. We internalize these messages, which happens without us realizing it when we are very young, and then they become internal barriers that we carry with us throughout our lives. So research shows that women don't apply for jobs unless we meet 90 to 100% of the qualifications, while men apply if they meet around 60%. Men are more likely to be overconfident and overestimate their abilities, while women tend to be underconfident and underestimate their abilities. Anecdotally, I've noticed a lot of negative self-talk come up in my professional development support group that I co-founded with Claire Wu from OSU. And personally, I'm really, really tired of seeing so many smart, talented women working in support roles where they do a lot of work and they don't get a lot of credit and they don't get promoted and they don't make the impact that they're capable of. I started out wanting to focus on helping women to identify and overcome our internal barriers, because I think the world will become more balanced when we have more women in leadership. And because I understand firsthand these barriers that women face when moving into leadership roles. But OWHE challenged me to look beyond women to other marginalized populations. So I thought about how the messages we receive from our families and society differ based on different aspects of our identities. Being a woman, I always felt like I had a place in society, as long as I stayed in my lane and played traditionally female roles of nurturer and supporter of others. But I know from my work in diversity, equity, and inclusion that some others receive messages that they are inherently inferior, with some even going so far as to say that there's no place for them in this world and they shouldn't exist, or that there is something wrong with them and they can be accepted only if they fix what is wrong and conform to what society expects of them. And although I didn't experience all of these messages myself, I can see how they make it impossible for some people to meet all of their core needs of survival, connection, and expression. It forces people to repress parts of themselves just to survive, or they risk their safety in favor of expression. And they also lose out on a lot of true connection because they aren't able to fully express themselves and still feel safe. Since most of our core beliefs formed when we were children or young adults, we didn't get to choose what got put in, but we do have the power to choose now and to override any beliefs that are limiting us from living full and satisfying lives. So even though the specific messages and the magnitude and the impact of those messages differ for people with different identities, the process for overriding those messages is the same. There is a process for identifying and addressing the negative internal chatter and limiting core beliefs. And so I'm here to share what I've learned about that process. To override unconscious limiting beliefs in women and other groups who have experienced internalized external oppression. It's the same reaction in the brain, and so it's the same process to heal. So we can work to change the world, and we should, but we work to change ourselves first, because when we change the filter so that we see positive self-worth regardless of what we experience in the world, we are better equipped to address the external problem, to do the external work. We can't effectively address the wicked problems in the world today while being constrained by our own internal barriers. It's doing the inner work to identify and address these beliefs is what enables us to do the outer work. Doing the inner work frees up energy and opens our eyes to new possibilities that we're able to individually and collectively chart a new course. So we can replace long-standing patterns that limit us with patterns that provide us the space to expand into our full potentials. If you don't believe that you are one, capable, and two, deserving of getting what you want, you will not be successful until you change these beliefs. So when your subconscious is out of alignment, your only goal is to gain alignment. It's a process of deconditioning, of unlearning what we've learned so that we can uncover our true nature. And once you know the source of the problem and start to understand the shape of the solution, then it's a matter of implementing, acting on the knowledge that you have. So the next question becomes, how do you align your subconscious beliefs with your conscious goals? How do you replace the beliefs that limit you? And I discovered I got to back up a second. So we are getting into the next part. So if you buy that that is the source of the problem, it's a problem in your subconscious, and you need to get down there and see what's going on and start to replace it. Now we're getting into how do you actually make those changes? And I discovered part of the answer to this question from Shauna Shapiro's TEDx talk. So I'm going to play a clip of that so you can hear it in her own words. Assuming that it's going to work. Here we go.
If, in rush hour traffic, you can remain perfectly calm, if you can see your neighbors travel to fantastic places without a twinge of jealousy, if you can love everyone around you unconditionally, and if you can always find contentment just where you are, then you're probably a dog, right? We hold ourselves to these unrealistic standards of perfection, and then we judge ourselves when we don't live up to them. The thing is, we're not supposed to be perfect. Perfection isn't possible, but transformation is. All of us have the capacity to change, to learn, and to grow, no matter what our circumstances. As a professor and scientist, I study how people change, how people transform. And one of the most effective vehicles I've found is mindfulness. My own journey into mindfulness was unexpected. When I was 17, I had spinal fusion surgery, a metal rod put in my spine. I went from a healthy, active teenager to lying in a hospital bed, unable to walk. And during the many months of rehabilitation, I tried to figure out how to live in this body that could no longer do what it used to. The physical pain was difficult, but worse was the fear and the loneliness, and I simply didn't have the tools to cope. So I began searching for something that could help, and eventually this search led me to a monastery in Thailand for my first meditation retreat. At the monastery, the monks didn't speak much English, and I didn't speak any Thai, but I understood mindfulness had something to do with paying attention in the present moment. My only instruction was to feel the breath going in and out of my nose. So I began. 1 breath, 2 breaths. My mind wandered off. I brought it back. 1 breath, 2 breaths. It wandered again, sucked into the past or lost in the future. And no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't stay present. Now this was frustrating because I thought meditation was supposed to feel like this, and instead it felt more like this. Right? Being present isn't so easy. In fact, check it out for yourself. I've been speaking for about 3 minutes. Have you noticed your mind has wandered? All of our minds wander. Research from Harvard shows the mind wanders on average 47% of the time. 47%. That's almost half of our lives that we're missing, that we're not here. So part of mindfulness is simply learning to train the mind in how to be here, where we already are. Like right now, let's practice together. Allow your eyes to close and just feel your feet on the floor. Wiggle your toes and sense your whole body sitting here, softening the face, softening the jaw, and notice that you're breathing. Feeling the breath as it naturally flows in and out of the body. Just being here. And as you're ready, taking a deeper breath in and out, allowing your eyes to open. So, back at the monastery, I was trying hard to do just this, to just be present. But no matter how hard I tried, my mind kept wandering off. And at this point, I really started to judge myself. What is wrong with you? You're terrible at this. Why are you even here? You're a fake. And then not only was I judging myself, I started judging everyone, even the monks. Why are they just sitting here? Shouldn't they be doing something? Thankfully, a monk from London arrived who spoke English. And as I shared with him my struggles, he looked at me and said, "Oh dear, you're not practicing mindfulness. You're practicing judgment, impatience, frustration." And then he said 5 words that have never left me. What you practice grows stronger. What you practice grows stronger. We know this now with neuroplasticity. Our repeated experiences shape our brain. We can actually sculpt and strengthen our synaptic connections based on repeated practice. For example, in the famous study of London taxi drivers, the visual spatial mapping part of the brain is bigger, stronger. They've been practicing navigating the 25,000 streets of London all day long. When you look at the brains of meditators, the areas related to attention, learning, compassion grow bigger and stronger. It's called cortical thickening, the growth of new neurons in response to repeated practice. What we practice grows stronger. The monk explained to me that if I was meditating with judgment, I was just growing judgment. Meditating with frustration, I'm growing frustration. He helped me understand that mindfulness isn't just about paying attention, it's about how we pay attention, with kindness. He said it's like these loving arms that welcome everything, even the messy, imperfect parts of ourselves. He also pointed out that we're practicing all the time, moment by moment, not just when we're meditating, but in every moment. We're growing something in every moment. So the question really becomes, what do you want to grow? What do you want to practice?
So I learned several things from Dr. Shauna Shapiro's talk, and the rest of it is amazing, so I recommend finishing it after this. But one of the main things that stuck with me was that this process of changing our beliefs, it's like this, it's actually physically changing our brain. So it's this cortical thickening. So then my question became, you know, how do we rewire our brains? How do we actually do that? And to find the answer, I turned to Dr. Susie Siegel. So I learned a technique for rewiring the brain to change subconscious beliefs from Dr. Siegel, who found that people who had a high internal locus of control, meaning those who believe that their choices, decisions, and actions are largely within their control, they consistently were achieving better results in all areas of life. But what if you don't have a high internal locus? Susie set out to find ways to develop that strong internal locus of control. And she developed the Thrive framework to teach people how to work with the part of your brain that drives change, your subconscious. Too often we think these things come down to strategies and tactics when it really comes down to our ways of being and our mindset. And Susie realized that the questions to ask when we are being held back by a limiting belief are, what's the goal that I really want, not just the task that gets me there? And what has to be true inside of me and my belief system in order to accomplish that goal? In order to align your subconscious with your conscious mind, you need to learn to speak the language of the subconscious. It's really about, once you start to become aware of what your beliefs are, then deciding consciously what you want to change them to. And then it's a practice of doing that work. But first, you need to understand how the subconscious mind works, that it's not rational, logical, or linear. It responds to images and feelings and thinks holistically. It's only concerned with survival, keeping you alive, and it's not concerned at all with thriving. It thinks the familiar is safe, and it learns in color, shape, and simple sentences. So remember that I'm giving you this high-level 50,000-foot overview. So I'm going to go through this quickly to give you an idea of the whole picture. And if you have questions, you can capture them and submit them to the Menti slide when we get to that at the end. So first, you want to focus on your destination. You need to have a clear picture of what you want your life to be like, not just what you don't want. So be aware enough of obstacles so that you can avoid them, but make sure that you're focusing on where you want to go. If you tell your mind to stop eating junk food, your subconscious hears junk food. And you want to bring all of your senses into this. So really engaging your senses. Because the subconscious responds to images and other sensory stimuli, the more you can bring in all of your senses into the process, the more likely it is to help direct us where we want to go. You want to feel the emotion now that you will feel when you make the change that you want to make. So our why Our whys, the why we do something, they're always connected to emotions. It's what we want to feel. It's what does this thing get me? How do I feel when I get it? So if you think about what you really want and how you're going to feel when you get it, will you feel excited or hopeful, calm, satisfied, loving, a sense of freedom? And then you act as if you're already there. The trick is that you're acting as if you already have what you want. You're in essence tricking your subconscious mind into believing that this is who you are already. So then you make confirmation bias work in your favor. Now your subconscious will be filtering everything through this particular lens because it believes it to be true. And finally, be kind to yourself. Berating doesn't work, nor does berating yourself for berating yourself. This is not just a side note. Just like Dr. Shapiro mentioned, that kindness is an integral part of mindfulness. It's also a critical part of the process of transforming these deeply held patterns and beliefs. So the Thrive framework puts these principles into practice by outlining specific steps to do right before you go to bed at a time when your subconscious is more open to new information and when you wake up in the morning. So I've quickly presented a lot of ideas here, and now I want to ground it all in a personal example. When I decided to start a business, I had total freedom in what I do, when I do it, and how I do it, because I'm a business of one. I'm my own boss, and I don't have any employees. I get to decide everything, and it's also on me to do everything. I started my business because coaching transformed my life, and I believe it's the way I can make the biggest contribution towards bringing about a better world. I chose to become a coach because my preferred method of working is one-on-one or in small groups. However, I felt compelled to present to larger audiences because I see myself in the role of knowledge synthesis and application, and I wanted to get my message out as much as possible. And that message is that it is possible to change our ways of thinking and being, which is what will lead to changes in how we treat ourselves, each other, and Mother Nature. So I really wanted to create a balanced work life where I alternated between production and rest and rejuvenation so that it was more sustainable and it was more fulfilling and more enjoyable and more effective. But I struggled when trying to compile and present information like this because I put too much pressure on myself. There's useful pressure and then there's excessive pressure. And I got this metaphor from Megan Watterson in a meditation, where she differentiated between the type of pressure that's like water flowing through a landscape that carves it out and shapes it over time versus the immediate and very forceful pressure of a jackhammer. And in our fast-paced society, a lot of times we're applying that jackhammer pressure to ourselves as opposed to a more gentle but steady pressure that reforms things over time. This other type of pressure can make a huge difference over time, but we do it in a way that we're not burning ourselves out. So when I recognize that I'm feeling that excessive jackhammer pressure, I ask myself, how do I ease up and bring myself back to what I know to be right and true for me, which is that life is about cycles. I value rest and rejuvenation, which I know enables the production. And also, what is the point in life if you're never actually enjoying it and always just trying to get to the next thing? So how do I bring myself back to that more gentle pressure where I'm still changing things because I'm not really happy with the way things are going in the wider world and sometimes also in my own life? So how do I carve these new paths in a way that is not energetically depleting? It's not making me less capable of creating the life and the world that I want. The answer is always in the moment to pause. So it's to slow down and take a breath, to feel where I am, to feel myself in my body, to remind myself of what it is that I value, what's important, and that sometimes it's time to take a break and go for a walk or get silent or do a guided meditation. something to get me out of the spinning thoughts in my head and back into my body wisdom and to reset my nervous system and calm down. So the main point is that first, there's this huge barrier of lack of awareness. If you don't know where the problem is, then your solutions will actually reinforce the problem. But one of the things that I noticed is that awareness of the general pattern is often not enough to change it, because what will still be hidden are the specific instances of when I'm following that general pattern. So I may have awareness that I put too much pressure on myself, that I'm too hard on myself, and that the pressure causes stress, which interferes with what I want to accomplish. This happened to me when I was preparing for this talk. I talked to one of my coaches about it, and I was telling her how I was trying to figure out my creative process. And I noticed that on Saturday mornings, when I wasn't trying to produce any sort of output, I could get into the creative flow. I would pick up my journal and read what I had written that week, or I'd write in there, and all of these ideas would bubble up to the surface, and I would produce some great stuff. It was amazing, but I was like, why can't I do that during the week? I want to do that during the week. I should be able to get into the creative flow when I want to. But I know I'm putting too much pressure on myself, so how do I still have the intention to produce, but not so much pressure? She just chuckled and said, Heather, do you realize how many times you just said the word should? And I honestly had no idea. I just laughed because it brought me out of my old story and allowed me to see what I was actually doing, which up until then was completely hidden to me. I was already familiar with the phrase, stop shoulding all over yourself, but I didn't realize I was doing it in the moment. It took somebody else to point it out to me. And as soon as she did, I was able to relax. And really what this is relaxing these patterns over time. You're not going to be able to overcome a persistent pattern that's been ingrained in you for a long time by using the jackhammer approach. It's more of creating that awareness of the general pattern and then creating opportunities for more awareness of that pattern in the moment and then relaxing away from it. Recognizing it as a pattern that I've had for a while, so I expect it to come back. Feeling compassion for myself because I realize that this is not me, but it's a result of my experiences, and my experiences were colored by how other people saw me and what they thought I should and shouldn't do. Now that I'm gaining this awareness and I'm starting to shift these patterns, but it takes time. And when I get close to making a really significant change, that's when my survival mind, the subconscious, the part of myself that is only concerned with survival, is feeling the most threatened. And so it doesn't appear to me as if I'm making up excuses, and I might not even feel scared. But what's going on is that I'm getting close to making some change, and my subconscious does whatever it can to protect me from the danger of the unknown. I had an experience where I became aware of this when I talked to Susie Siegel, who has become a mentor of mine and who I learned the Thrive technique from. I had told her how I had been using her technique for a while and seen some initial results, but after a while, it was really hard for me to keep going and stick with it, and I wasn't motivated anymore. And I came across this other technique, which I thought might be better for me because it was a more narrative style where hers was more discrete affirmations. And so I thought, maybe Susie's technique isn't right for me. And also, I think I need some novelty because after a while, I just can't keep going. I was telling her all of this. And she just said, well, what if that's just a story you're telling yourself because you were getting close to making significant change, and that's really threatening to your survival mind because you know that's the way this works. And I just stopped. I paused. I hadn't even considered that, but as soon as she said it, it hit me in the gut, and I felt there was definitely some truth to that. So I explored it even more, and what helped me was to add what I call in-the-moment practices to my Thrive routine, which I consider more of like an anchoring routine because it helps me set the direction I want to go and picture myself being there. When I notice that I'm not really making progress and I feel like I'm spinning my wheels and I'm feeling anxious, the practice is to pause and put my hand on my heart, breathe, and extend compassion to myself. So I'm not actually trying to change it. I'm not trying to make the fear go away. I'm just recognizing that this is a pattern that I've had for a while, and here it is again, and that's okay. And I'm trying to do something that's hard, and I'm living in the context of a world that's completely insane, and I'm trying to make it better, so let's just be nice. So what I'm afraid of is being visible and open to criticism, which feels very threatening to my survival mind in my subconscious. So I went over the location of the problem, a very brief overview of the nature of the solution, and the barriers came up in my story. And I'm just going to briefly touch on those again, because this is more of like a preview. I want you to know that these are the barriers to expect, so that you're not surprised by them. So first, a barrier can be an impossible goal. In Shauna Shapiro's talk, she said, perfection isn't possible, transformation is. And if we're focused on these impossible goals, like I'm going to shift, I'm not going to be this way anymore, I'm going to get rid of it, and then every time it comes up, we see that as a failure, that can be a barrier. Distractions. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the world now, and change is happening faster and faster. And we clearly have priorities, like just to take care of ourselves and our families. And so these are very real things that can get in the way. And then we have our own blind spots. Like we may know the general pattern exists, but we fail to see it in the moment. And then there's fear. And this is a big one. This is an entire other talk about how fear disguises itself as what I've called rational lies. So it's like, it sounds like it's good. It sounds like it makes sense. You convince yourself that it's true, but it's really just fear. And then we're often focusing too much on the what. We have a plan, we try to do it, but we're not really focusing on how. How are we treating ourselves in the process? Because kindness matters. Some strategies that I've found to address those barriers is one, focus on the how. Pay attention to how you're treating yourself because it's really important. Combine these anchoring routines within the moment practices. So the anchoring routines are the things that I do regularly to provide a sense of grounding, like meditating in the morning and reminding myself what my vision and goals are. But those routines alone aren't always enough to shift because I could still be spending my entire day reinforcing my old patterns if I'm not aware of it. So it's been really helpful to add the in-the-moment compassion practice to reinforce the new paths that I'm building. Acknowledge your progress. We often don't see our progress, and that goes back to trying for an impossible goal. So if you recognize that noticing the pattern is a success as opposed to, oh, the old pattern came up, that means I failed, and noticing becomes your metric, and how often you spend time in the new pattern versus the old, that is success. That can be really helpful. And don't go it alone. So a lot of the times that I got stuck, even though I had the knowledge, I knew all about it, I was not able to see what I was doing until somebody else pointed it out to me. And finally, I feel like we need to be centered and balanced to face the challenges of the world today. Our capacity to meet challenges needs to grow for us to be able to live and lead in this world. Because what's happening in the world is heavy. And people feel isolated and fractured and scared and angry and intense frustration at the complete lack of control and not knowing when this pandemic in particular will end. So we're in this time of great upheaval where the old systems are breaking down and we haven't yet built the new systems. And the people who can change their thinking to move away from limiting beliefs to imagining and building a better future are the ones who will not just survive, but thrive during this difficult time and also be the ones to help create and bring about that future. So I'm imagining a world where everybody has freed themselves from the conditioning that has limited us and led us to where we are today. And what a different world it would be like if people were really coming from a place of high self-worth, feeling like they're deserving and they belong and they're able to express themselves. That's the way to greater health and harmony. And if it's possible at this point, I think that's how it's going to happen. So I'm going to pause there and go to questions. So if anybody has questions, you can go ahead and put them in the Menti slide. I'm sorry, I'm trying to see the chat and I can't see it. So I'm going to assume that everything is working okay. And I see one question of, how do you avoid toxic positivity while practicing mindfulness and being more engaged? So I'm guessing, I'm a little unclear on what you mean by toxic positivity, and maybe that is the ignoring all of the bad things that are going on, like having Pollyanna glasses and just seeing things through that kind of view. So assuming that that's what this question is asking, I would say that what I'm trying to do in my life is not to ignore the negative and only focus on the positive, but to notice that I have had a tendency to look for the negative, and whatever we look for, we find. And so I'm really trying to shift to a more balanced view where I'm noticing the positive and the negative. And so I'm getting a more realistic view of what's going on. And it is by focusing on what we want to bring about that we start to create those situations in our lives and bring those out. Okay, so I'm only seeing that question. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So I'm wondering what resonated with you the most. I know that we all came in here with different backgrounds and experiences. And if you can just type into the Menti app what resonated the most. I have a feeling that I'm having technical difficulties because I can't see the chat.
It says that you need to show the next slide.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, for some reason on my screen, it's not showing me the whole thing, which it worked when I tested it, but okay, I can read some of these. So I kind of like the idea of tricking your mind into feeling what you want to feel after you get what you want, as if you already have it. Yeah, so that was something that really resonated with me, is this acting as if. You're acting as if you already have it, because that's how confirmation bias works. Like, we want whatever we believe, whatever's already in there, like we want to reinforce that. So we start looking for it. And so we create that evidence. We find it and we create it once we know what we're looking for. And in the follow-up email, we'll send this, since I can't read all of them, but I can see acknowledging my progress and what do I want to practice. The problem is not about strategy or some sort of lack. Yes, huge. I spent so much time chasing different strategies and trying to figure it all out, and just well, maybe I haven't quite figured it out, and there's this other technique that I need to learn, or maybe I just can't do this. It's just not for me. And what you practice grows stronger. Exactly. And we're practicing all the time. Okay, so those of you who are in the app, if you could give us a one-word takeaway from today, what would that be? Pause. Yes. Perspective. Yep. It's about shifting your perspective. That's what opens up the possibilities. And purpose. Having a clear sense of purpose. Fun. I forget that one a lot, so I thank you for the reminder. And relax. Cheesy. Okay. Thoughtfulness. Nice. Balance. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to switch back to the slides. Just for a quick little wrap up. So the point that I wanted to make is that it's the inner work that allows for the outer work, and there is a way to do the inner work, even though it sometimes seems impossible. But the inner work is the most important thing that you can do. It's identifying and addressing your own barriers is the most important work that we can do, because the outer work extends from that. On another level, the inner work is the outer work. It's freeing ourselves from the oppressive beliefs is the way that we create a more kind, just, and sustainable world. So imagine the world we would be living in if everyone did this, instead of clinging to our old beliefs and identities out of fear. Don't feel selfish for doing this, knowing that you probably will because you've been programmed to think that way. But that's part of the reprogramming, recognizing when you have those thoughts and then countering them, reminding yourself, this is the way things work. This is why I am the way I am, and this is why we are where we are in the world. And if we want to shift it, the shift starts with us internally by changing those messages that run on autopilot in the backs of our minds, by changing what we believe, and then knowing that you're going to come across barriers and have strategies to overcome those barriers. Know that it's a process and a cycle. Change is not linear, it's a spiral. So when you feel like you haven't gotten very far, that you've put a lot of effort, but you haven't actually moved very far, think of it in terms of a spiral. You are actually moving, and the more you move outward on the spiral, the more possibilities open up for you. And you're not alone. Now I see that I did that wrong. Okay, so I want to extend an offering to the members of OWHE, because I know how it's helped me to have my coaches work through me on this process of identifying and overcoming limiting beliefs. And so I would like to offer a 1-hour coaching session. This is not a sales pitch. I have another, if people are interested in a series of coaching. I have another session for that, but this is purely a strategy session to look at what do you want to change and what might be getting in the way, and what are some of those anchoring practices and in the moment practices that might help you get there. And here's a list of references of the people's work that I drew on for this presentation, and the slides will be available. Shannon will email those out afterwards. And finally, thank you. I really appreciate you coming, showing up, spending the time here, working to make yourselves better, the world better, to, really showing up. And I wasn't sure, this is my cat, I wasn't sure if she was going to be here today because sometimes she sits on the chair next to me, but I just wanted to bring her into it regardless. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, right on time at 1. We know y'all have busy days. Thank you so much, Heather, for sharing this with all of us in this format. And thank you all for coming. Hope to see you at the next one. And look out for the email from me in about a week or two with follow-up information. All right. Have a good rest of your day.